Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm Sam Albanese from the National Weather Service. Happy New Year to everybody. And let's get started by taking a look at our satellite imagery to see what's going on. We have this one storm system that was moving on up into the central Bering Sea, or central Aleutians and into the Bering Sea, pushed the front over towards the eastern Aleutian Islands, and that was fortunately, it was relatively warm, so we didn't have any snow issues, but there was rain and wind associated with that. And running the loop one more time, this next system that's developing well south of the Kamchatka Peninsula here is going to be the one that's going to be moving on up into the picture, into the Bering Sea later in the, towards the weekend, and it should be a relatively strong storm as it moves on into the picture. Taking a look at the satellite imagery over the state of Alaska itself, we can see this frontal boundary that pushed on up into southeast Alaska overnight last night and through the Panhandle today. That was responsible for some heavy snowfall in that northern Panhandle region of the state up through the Haines and Skagway area. But once that front pushed through, the temperatures warmed up dramatically, switching it over to a mixture of rain and snow or entirely rain. Running the loop one more time. And another thing of note is this cloudy mass pushed on up over much of the interior portion of the state, a lot of cloud cover as well as warmer air, and it moderated a lot of the temperatures that were very cold up into the interior in the overnight hours, as we'll see when we get to the temperature map. Taking a look at our map of today's weather, here's our low pressure system that was moving on up, that did move on up from the Alaska Peninsula, south of the peninsula, to that southern Cook Inlet region today, with the front extending along the North Gulf Coast and off the coast of southeast Alaska. Rain in the southern Panhandle, and as I said earlier, snow into the northern Panhandle, but once that front pushed through, warmed things up, and it was a mixture of rain and snow. Snow along the North Gulf Coast into northern Prince William Sound, with rain in the southern portions of the Sound. Kodiak Island saw rain changing over to rain showers, and we had some snow showers on the backside of this low with a mixture of rain and snow showers over the eastern Alaska Peninsula. Clouds pushed right on up throughout the interior portion of the state. Up along the Arctic coast, it stayed cloud-free, but the windy conditions were resulting in areas of blowing snow up along the Arctic coast and also into that northeast interior. Generally just the ridgetop areas where there was blowing snow, and there's been an advisory out for blowing snow and cooler conditions now for the last day or two, and that's going to go on into tomorrow, particularly up along the Arctic coast. The blowing snow advisories in that northeast interior should be ending tonight. Out into the Bering Sea and in the Aleutians, here's our low pressure system. Tightly wrapped low, had some strong winds right around it and in advance of the front, but it pushed, all it did was result in rain across much of the Aleutian Islands, some showers out towards Shemya that I didn't put on the map, and cloudy conditions over the eastern Aleutian Islands and the Alaska Peninsula itself. Taking a look at the forecast for tonight, expect our low pressure system over the south central region to really start to fall apart and weaken dramatically. Weak low pressure up into the interior in this trough. Weak low pressure persisting along the North Gulf Coast. Onshore flows, showery type weather throughout southeast Alaska. Rain in the southern Panhandle, a mixture of rain and snow in that northern Panhandle, the North Gulf Coast. Rain or rain and snow showers in the Prince William Sound area. A mixture of rain and snow is likely over the Kenai Peninsula, as well as some snow showers possibly mixed with rain up into the Susitna Valley. The Copper River Basin is going to generally miss out on the precipitation. They'll have the cloud cover. There will be some snow up along the Alaska Range, expecting some snow in the Tanana Valley, as well as into the upper Yukon Valley area, with blowing snow conditions into the evening hours along the ridgetop areas. Clouds are going to spread across the Brooks Range to the Arctic coast, although the eastern Arctic coast should remain cloud-free. Blowing snow can be expected along the entirety of the Arctic coast with the stronger winds that are occurring up there. Our system will move into the eastern to central Bering Sea, and that's going to result in rain spreading across the eastern Aleutian Islands and the Dutch Harbor area, eventually to the Cold Bay area. Rain and snow mixed over the Pribilof Islands as we move on up further north into the Bering Sea where the Arctic frontal boundary is. Expect generally snow on the north side of the Arctic front, a mixture of rain and snow showers behind this low in that western Bering Sea and all the way down across the majority of the central and western Aleutian Islands. The forecast for Thursday, low pressure along the North Gulf Coast is going to persist as it continues to weaken. Some showery conditions can be expected in southeast Alaska, rain showers to the south, a mixture of rain and snow showers to the north, generally in the morning with the snow showers mixed in, rain showers in the afternoon. Along the North Gulf Coast, a mixture of rain and snow showers can be expected all the way into the Prince William Sound area. We are expecting a chance of some snow across much of the eastern interior up into the upper Yukon Valley, portions of the central interior, as well as down towards the Kuskokwim Valley and into the Susitna Valley. And that's just a chance of snow, not really expecting much, if anything. Blowing snow will persist along the Arctic coast, cloudy conditions over the northwest portion of the state, and our system in the Bering Sea will continue to push to the north. It is weakening during the day Thursday, but as the front moves on in and pushes moisture over that Arctic frontal boundary, expect some snow in the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta regions, as well as over towards the St. Lawrence Island area. About anywhere from 1 to 3 inches of snow is what we're expecting there. Down across the Alaska Peninsula in the warmer air, rain can be expected there behind the front, some rain showers, rain and snow showers mixed across the Pribilof Islands. And across the Aleutian Islands, generally cloudy conditions until we get out into the western Aleutians, and our next storm system is moving into the picture. It's going to bring some windier conditions with a mixture of rain and snow initially, changing all over to rain during the day on Thursday as the warm air pushes to the north. Taking a look now at the forecast for Friday. That weak low pressure is persisting right along the North Gulf Coast, nearly dissipating by this point. This is really the Arctic frontal boundary. Southeast Alaska, cloudy conditions in the southern Panhandle, a mixture of rain and snow showers in the northern Panhandle in the morning. By the afternoon, again, that'll be more rain shower type conditions as conditions warm. Rain and snow showers along that North Gulf Coast, basically east of Cordova. A chance of some snow showers across the Copper River Basin down to the Kenai Peninsula. Cloudy conditions in the eastern interior with some breaks in the clouds in the upper Yukon Valley. Up along the Arctic coast in the Brooks Range, cloudy conditions, outside chance that you might see some snow in that trough there. In the Bering Sea and the Bering coastal areas, another big storm system has really deepening significantly. Strong winds around this low pressure system can be expected. The front's going to drape on down through the central Aleutian Islands. With that, expect rain across the central Aleutian Islands as well as the western Aleutian Islands, with some rain showers immediately behind the front. Further north into the Bering Strait region and the St. Lawrence Island area, with this trough extending to this low near the Seward Peninsula, the likelihood that you're going to see some snow in those areas during the day Friday, right on up into the Kotzebue Sound area to the northwest Arctic coast. Taking a look at temperatures around the state this afternoon, southeast Alaska in the mid-40s in the southern Panhandle to the upper 30s in the northern Panhandle, near 40 at Yakutat. The Prince William Sound area was in the mid-30s. Copper River Basin stayed relatively cool today, staying in the single digits for the most part, although the western portions of the Copper River Basin were a bit warmer into the teens and 20s. Eastern interior in the Tanana Valley, temperatures were generally in the teens to around 10, although Northway was stubbornly holding at 2 degrees. In the south central region, temperatures rather warm, in the generally in the 30s, some 20-degree readings in the Susitna Valley. Homer was in at 41 degrees, and Kodiak hit about 40 degrees today. Excuse me. Taking a look at the northern portions of the state, the Arctic coast saw temperatures generally in the single digits above and below zero. The Brooks Range saw temperatures generally right around 10 to 14 degrees. Moving over towards the western Arctic coast and the Kotzebue Sound area, temperatures hovering about 10 degrees below zero to about 10 degrees above zero. Over the Seward Peninsula, temperatures were in the right around 10 to 15 degrees. Same thing for the Norton Sound area. Down towards the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta, temperatures in the teens to low 20s are what we were seeing there today. For southwestern Alaska and the Aleutian Islands, Bristol Bay area, temperatures actually cooled off from what they were yesterday, only into the upper 20s to low 30s. The Alaska Peninsula, the mid to upper 30s. 40 degrees in the Dutch Harbor area, mid-30s in the Pribilof Islands, and out across the remainder of the Aleutian Islands, temperatures were into the lower 40s. Taking a look at our lows for tonight, expect temperatures in southeast Alaska to generally stay above freezing for the majority of the Panhandle, except up into the White Pass, Chilkoot Pass area north of Skagway. Temperatures in the teens there, but down in Skagway itself, expect your temperatures to stay in the lower 30s. Along the North Gulf Coast and the South Central region, temperatures in the teens to mid-20s to mid-30s in the Cordova area. Copper River Basin temperatures should hold in the single digits above zero. The eastern interior up towards Tanana Valley and the upper Yukon Valley do expect conditions to stay in the single digits above or below zero, although Fort Yukon and the eastern portions of Brooks Range could get as low as 20 below. Arctic coastal areas expect your temperatures to be generally around 0 to close to 10 below zero for much of that area. The Seward Peninsula expect your temperatures to be in the single digits to right around 11 degrees. Southwestern Alaska, there'll be some cooling tonight, temperatures in the single digits to about 12 degrees over Nunivak Island, and then down towards Bristol Bay, temperatures in the teens to low 20s. The Alaska Peninsula should see temperatures staying in the 30s. Expect your temperatures to stay in the mid-30s across the Aleutian Islands as well as the Pribilof Islands. Taking a look at the highs for tomorrow, expect temperatures in southeast Alaska to be generally in the 30s to low 40s in the southern Panhandle, mid-20s up into the Haines Skagway area, at least up into the White Pass area down in Skagway itself. Expect your temperatures to generally stay right around freezing to about 35. The Prince William Sound area, expect your temperatures in the mid-20s to mid-30s. Copper River Basin should see your temperatures warm up into the teens. Eastern interior temperatures are going to hold into that single-digit range above or below zero, although the lee side of the Alaska Range temperatures should be into the teens. The South Central area, expect mid-20s to mid-30s down to Kodiak Island into Bristol Bay. 20-degree readings over the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta region. In the 20s in that Norton Sound area, and the teens in the Kotzebue Sound area. Expect temperatures in the mid-30s to near 40 over the Alaska Peninsula and into the 40s across the Aleutian Islands and upper 30s in the Pribilof Islands. For our flying weather, marginal to IFR conditions throughout southeast Alaska, marginal conditions in the eastern interior with some IFR conditions up into the Tanana Valley and the upper Yukon Valley, with marginal conditions along the south slopes of the Brooks Range. In the western portions of the state, expect marginal conditions to IFR conditions from the Alaska Peninsula along the Bering Sea coast up to the St. Lawrence Island area, with some marginal to IFR conditions along the Aleutian Islands themselves. For our passes tomorrow, expect VFR conditions for Anaktuvik as well as Adigan Pass. Down to the Alaska Range, VFR, occasionally marginal VFR conditions for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass. Rainy Pass, MVFR to VFR conditions as well. For Windy Pass, marginal conditions, as well as Isabel Pass, marginal conditions, and marginal conditions for Mentasta Pass. Expect marginal conditions in Tonita Pass, with marginal conditions in Portage Pass, and IFR conditions for both Chilkoot and White Pass. Taking a look at our freezing levels, at the surface over the majority of the state, up to about 2,000 feet in the southern Panhandle, 2,000 feet across the Alaska Peninsula, as well as the Aleutian Islands. For our icing tomorrow, expect occasional moderate rime icing from your freezing level to 11,000 feet in that Bering Sea coastal areas to the Alaska Peninsula, as well as over the central to western Aleutian Islands, and also expect some isolated moderate rime icing in the northern Panhandle and that North Gulf Coast from the freezing level to about 11,000 feet. Our jet stream starts off at about 165 knots off south of the Kamchatka Peninsula to 100 knots south of the Aleutian Islands, 125 knots south of the Alaska Peninsula, 105 knots south of the Gulf, and 110 knots over the Queen Charlotte Islands. Down to the 9,000 foot level, generally light winds over the mainland, about 20 to 30 knot winds in southeast Alaska, 60 knot winds across the Alaska Peninsula, 35 knot winds as you move out to the Aleutian Islands, at 50 knots out in the western Aleutian Islands. Down to that 3,000 foot level, about 20 to 30 knot winds across the majority of the Aleutians until you get out into the extreme western Aleutians, 45 to 50 knots there, 35 knot winds across the Alaska Peninsula, light winds over the interior with 25 to 35 knot winds up on the Arctic coast, and light winds in southeast Alaska. And for our turbulence, expect some moderate turbulence over the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay area, Kodiak Island. Basically, expect that below 3,000 feet, and isolated moderate turbulence out over the western Aleutian Islands. And that wraps up this portion of the show. Come back for the marine forecast.
Like most people, Dennis Beam and his daughter Kelly weren't worried about the cold the night their car slid into a ditch in the middle of a blizzard.
I wasn't really too concerned. I'd been stuck before and it wasn't all that deep. But the wind kept picking up. and the storm just didn't let up. I was getting wet trying to get the car out, but it was no good, so I decided to wait. About 9 that morning, we'd been stuck about 4 hours. Storm wasn't stopping at all, and we were really getting cold. I figured nothing was going to happen up there on a country road. No help, period. So I decided to go for help. You stay warm and you stay in the car no matter what, okay?
Okay.
Everything's going to be okay. I love you.
Love you too.
Okay, now you be good. Right there. Right there, okay?
I didn't want to be left alone, but Dad said he'd be back for me. He promised.
Leaving Kelly was like leaving my heart behind, and I didn't know when I'd get it back. I couldn't see a thing. It was freezing. My eyes were frozen shut. I had ice all over my feet, but I had to keep going. There was nothing else to do.
Help! Please, this is Kelly Dean. We had a CB radio in the car, so I tried to call for help. Help! But no one answered. I kept wondering where Daddy was. Can you hear me?
It took me 3 hours to get to a house, and it was literally my last ounce of energy. My feet were black, parts of my face were frozen, but that wasn't my main concern. Kelly was still in that car, and the police said they couldn't get to her until the storm stopped, and there was nothing I could do.
After it got dark, I didn't know what had happened. I couldn't stop thinking about Dad. I had 3 pieces of candy, but I wanted to save them for Dad because I thought he'd be hungry when he came back.
After 10 hours, I didn't know what to think. She'd been alone so long. There was a lot of worry time then. Yeah. A lot of thinking time. Kelly's okay. I think. I had to leave her in the car.
Sometimes in the car, I dream that Daddy might not come back.
About 1 the next morning, the storm
thank you.
broke, and the police headed off to get Kelly.
Have you heard anything?
Nothing yet. All I could think was that after 19 hours, who knows? She'd been there so long with no heat. I kept hoping I'd put enough emphasis on staying in that car until I got back.
When the rescuers came, I asked if Dad was okay. He said yeah. I was glad, because it was all over and Dad was okay.
It's for you?
Yes. Thank God. And then the call came. She was
Where's she now?
okay.
Is she
My
okay?
whole world lit up then.
Oh, thank God. Thank you very much. Yes. Okay. She's okay.
Kelly suffered only mild symptoms of hypothermia. As the snow buried the car, it insulated and protected her from the severe cold and high wind. Dennis was badly frostbitten because of his walk through the snow. Which of the two had been in the most danger? Without a doubt, Dennis. As soon as he left the car, he put himself in tremendous jeopardy. Neither father or daughter were well prepared for the extreme weather conditions they encountered. A few carefully chosen items would have given them the extra margin of safety they needed. One blanket wasn't enough. Sleeping bags would have been better. Extra clothing would have been extremely welcome after Dennis got wet. Matches and candles. A flashlight with extra batteries. Signal flares. High-calorie, non-perishable food. A shovel and a sack of sand, ashes, or even kitty litter. And a first aid kit. These are examples of items you need. Winter travel is serious business, and you must be prepared for it. Your car should be in good working order. Know the route you plan to take, and tell somebody else where you're going and when you plan to arrive. Check the latest weather information before you leave. The National Weather Service provides up-to-the-minute weather forecasts and can predict most severe storms. If the people in our next story had listened to the weather forecast, they would be alive today. Traveling back to school, 2 students drove directly into a severe winter storm. They had a 4-wheel drive vehicle and were sure they could get through. First, they came upon a roadblock warning travelers to pull off the highway. They went around it. Several miles further, they got stuck in a large snowdrift directly under a bridge. They tried to dig out, but it was hopeless. Soaking wet, they changed clothes. Stuck in the snowdrift, isolated from help, they decided to sit it out. Wait until someone came along and found them. The next morning, someone did. They were dead. They had made two fatal mistakes. One, traveling in the face of deteriorating weather conditions. And two, ignoring a police roadblock. Ironically, it appeared that after they got stuck, they did everything right. They started the car every so often to keep warm. They changed into dry clothing after getting wet trying to dig out. And they didn't abandon their car. However, stuck under the bridge, the wind trapped fatal carbon monoxide fumes around and inside the car. A freak accident? Maybe. But they really died because they didn't use common sense. After those first two mistakes, every other decision only compounded their danger. Ed and Paul Miluski, Dennis and Kelly Beam could have been winter storm fatalities. The two students were. Being prepared for winter emergencies will always better your odds in a snowstorm. So will using good judgment and common sense. These guidelines, if you get caught in a severe snowstorm, will help you survive the cold.
Welcome back, and let's get started with the marine forecast for Southeast Alaska. The inside waters, generally light winds, 10 to 15 knots or less, and south to southeast. The southern outside waters, expect your winds to be out of the west-southwest around 25 knots, and the east Gulf Coast, expect west winds around 15 knots. On Friday, expect your winds in the inside waters to be south to southwest about 15 knots, basically north of Petersburg up through the Lynn Canal Glacier Bay area, with west to northwest winds 20 knots in the southern panhandle. The outer coastal waters, expect your winds to be out of the west at 20 knots right on up to the east Gulf Coast. For the south central region on Thursday, expect light and variable winds in Prince William Sound as well as northern Cook Inlet. Southwest winds 15 knots along the north Gulf Coast, increasing to about west 30 knots as we move over towards the Barren Islands. Southwest winds 20 knots from Augustine on up into the southern Cook Inlet, with west to southwest winds 25 to 30 knots across Kodiak Island. On Friday, expect the winds to remain light and variable in Prince William Sound as well as Cook Inlet. South to southwest winds about 20 knots along the north Gulf Coast. South to southeast winds from the south of Kodiak Island to the Barren Island region, and southwest winds 20 knots from Chillicothe Strait up through the Augustine area. Taking a look at the Alaska Peninsula on Thursday, expect your winds to be out of the southwest 25 knots in the south side waters of the peninsula, with south winds 25 knots in Bristol Bay and south winds increasing to 40 knots late in the day on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula and generally further west. On Friday, expect your winds to be out of the southeast 25 knots south of the eastern peninsula to south winds 25 knots in Bristol Bay. East winds 25 knots south of the western peninsula to southeast winds 20 knots on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula. For the Aleutian Islands on Thursday, southwest winds about 35 to 40 knots over the eastern and central Aleutian Islands, west winds 40 knots over the central to western Aleutian Islands to 35 knots, and expect your winds to be out of the south at 35 knots over the extreme western Aleutian Islands. On Friday, southwest winds 40 knots in the extreme western Aleutian Island waters, south winds 40 knots over the central to eastern or central eastern portions of the Aleutian Island waters, and expect southeast winds about 35 to 40 knots west of Nikolsky, 25 to 30 knots over the Unalaska area. Taking a look at our Bering Sea coastal waters, expect your winds to be southwest 40 knots in the Pribilof Islands, south 35 knots south of Nunivak Island to southeast 25 knots north of Nunivak Island, and east to northeast winds in the St. Lawrence Island waters at 25 knots and 30-knot northeasterlies in the St. Matthew Island region. Taking a look at the area for Friday, expect south winds 30 knots in the Pribilof Islands as well as south of the Nunivak Island region, south to southwest winds 25 knots north of Nunivak Island, southeast winds 35 knots west of St. Matthew Island, and east winds 20 knots over the St. Lawrence Island waters. For our Arctic coastal region, expect your winds to be out of the east 30 knots over the eastern Arctic coast to 25 knots just north of Barrow, and expect northeast winds 25 knots over the northwest Arctic coastal waters to 20 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound. Taking a look at the area for Friday, expect east winds 25 knots over the eastern Arctic coast to just north of Barrow to the northwest Arctic coast as well, and then outside of Kotzebue Sound, expect your winds to be out of the east at about 20 knots. For a quick recap for tonight, expect our low pressure system to basically be weakening in this North Gulf Coast region with a lobe of the low moving on up into the eastern interior. Still some onshore flow into southeast Alaska. Scattered rain showers to the south, rain and snow showers to the northern panhandle. Some rain and snow over the south central region is very likely. Snow likely into the eastern interior as well as down the Yukon River Valley to the Yukon Delta. And with our storm in the Bering Sea, expect some wet and windy conditions out there. But we're out of time for the show this evening. Thank you for watching and have a good evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.